There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, a moment so quiet it almost feels unreal. It's the moment when he speaks and nothing speaks back. No argument, no explanation, no second chance, just silence. And that silence doesn't scream, it settles. It tells him everything his ears refused to hear before. Silence has a reputation for being weak. People think silence means surrender. They think it means there was nothing left to say. But silence is often the loudest statement a person can make. Because before silence, there were warnings. Before silence, there were conversations. Before silence, there was patience stretched so thin it almost broke. Silence doesn't show up suddenly. It arrives after effort leaves the room. Silence is often misunderstood. People assume it means emptiness, confusion, or fear. They think when someone stops speaking, they have run out of strength. But real silence doesn't come from weakness. It comes from clarity. It is not the absence of words. It is the presence of resolve. Silence is what happens when a person finally understands that explaining themselves again will change nothing. It is the moment they realize their voice is no longer being heard, only tolerated. And in that realization, silence becomes intentional. It becomes chosen. Because continuing to speak in a space where respect does not exist is not communication. It is self-betrayal. Before silence, there were attempts. Long conversations, late night talks, messages carefully written and rewritten to avoid conflict. There were explanations given with patience, then repeated with frustration, then delivered with exhaustion. Silence does not arrive suddenly. It is built slowly, brick by brick, through being interrupted, dismissed, minimized, or misunderstood. Every ignored feeling adds weight. Every broken promise adds distance. Until one day, speaking feels heavier than staying quiet. That is when silence steps in, not as a reaction, but as a boundary. A line drawn where self-respect finally says enough. Silence is also a form of self-control. It takes strength to stop responding when you have so much to say. It takes discipline to walk away when emotions are begging you to fight. Silence means choosing peace over proving a point. It means understanding that not every battle deserves your energy, and not every person deserves access to your thoughts. When someone chooses silence, they are no longer trying to win the argument. They are trying to save themselves. They recognize that continuing to speak will only drain them further, and silence becomes the only way to protect what is left. What makes silence powerful is that it cannot be manipulated. Words can be twisted, intentions questioned, emotions dismissed. Silence stands firm. It does not defend itself, and it does not explain itself. It simply exists. And in that stillness, it forces reflection. The one left behind begins to replay old conversations, searching for meaning that was once handed to them clearly but ignored. Silence does not chase understanding, it waits for it. And often, understanding arrives too late when silence has already become permanent. Choosing silence is choosing dignity. It is a quiet declaration that one's value does not depend on being validated by someone else. It is the decision to stop pouring energy into places that no longer nurture growth. Silence says, I know who I am, and I no longer need to convince you. It is not dramatic. It is not loud, but it is final. Because when someone chooses silence after trying everything else, they are not leaving the conversation. They are reclaiming themselves. Words are meant to connect us, to bridge the gaps between hearts and minds, to share our truth. But words have power only when they are received with attention and care. When respect is absent, words become like echoes in an empty room. They bounce around but never reach anyone. At first, he may have spoken with hope, believing that his intentions would be understood, that effort would be recognized, that emotions would be valued. But over time, Repeated misunderstandings and dismissals chip away at the strength of every syllable until speaking feels like shouting into a void. Respect is the soil in which words grow. Without it, even the most sincere expressions wither. He may have tried to articulate his feelings carefully, to reason calmly, to explain patiently. But every ignored sentence, every brushed off concern, and every insult veiled in humor erodes that foundation. Words that once could inspire, persuade, or heal now fall flat. They no longer carry the weight they once did because they are no longer met with acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is what gives words their meaning. When respect disappears, words are no longer tools for connection. They become burdens that drain the speaker's energy. It is frustrating to realize that people can hear words and still refuse to understand them. He may recall moments when his voice was filled with truth, only to be met with indifference, defensiveness, or ridicule. Over time, this repeated cycle creates a profound exhaustion. Words, once instruments of expression, begin to feel futile. The more he tries, the less they resonate, and the louder he speaks, the quieter the response. Silence, then, is not absence. It is the natural consequence of ignored words. The message is clear: if you will not honor the words offered, they lose their purpose. The tragedy lies not in the words themselves, but in the person who no longer listens. Words lose power when they are dismissed, misinterpreted, or met with contempt. No amount of clarity, no degree of sincerity can restore their effectiveness in the absence of respect. In a relationship, in any dynamic, this is where communication collapses. Effort becomes pointless and frustration festers. One begins to feel that speaking is not for connection, but merely for self-expression. And even then, it carries the bitter taste of futility. Eventually, he begins to understand that silence is a response to the erosion of respect. It is not stubbornness, nor is it weakness. It is recognition. When words are no longer honored, silence becomes the only language strong enough to preserve dignity. It is a way of saying, without speaking, that what he has to offer, the truth of his feelings, the honesty of his intentions, the depth of his care, deserves acknowledgement. And when that acknowledgement never comes, silence steps in to replace words that have been rendered powerless. Not every departure comes with a storm. Some of the most profound exits are silent, subtle, almost invisible. People leave quietly when they are exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. When he realizes the silence is forever, he must understand that it didn't arrive suddenly. It is the result of repeated effort met with indifference. Every explanation, every conversation, every attempt to be understood chipped away at their patience until there was nothing left to give. And when someone finally runs out of energy, they don't announce their exit. They slip away with quiet resolve. Those who leave quietly are not weak. They are not careless. They are aware of their value and understand that staying in a place where they are consistently dismissed diminishes them. They have tried to bridge the gaps, to mend the fractures, to keep the connection alive, but there is a limit to how much one can endure before it becomes self-destructive. Silence becomes their shield, their final assertion of self-respect. They do not seek to punish, they seek only to preserve themselves. And in the stillness of their absence, the weight of what has been ignored is finally revealed. Quiet departures are the most painful to witness because they leave no trace of confrontation. There is no anger, no argument, no dramatic scene that makes the leaving obvious. It simply happens, and suddenly the space they occupied feels hollow. He may replay interactions in his mind, searching for signs he missed, trying to understand why they didn't fight, why they didn't shout, why they didn't beg for acknowledgement. The reality is stark. They didn't need to. They had already communicated everything through their patience. And when that was no longer respected, leaving quietly became their answer. There is a unique power in leaving without fanfare. It is deliberate, controlled, and silent, but its impact is undeniable. The quiet exit forces reflection. It exposes the truth that connection is mutual, that effort alone is not enough, and that ignoring the needs and feelings of others carries consequences that cannot be reversed. He may wish for confrontation, for the chance to explain himself, to beg for return. But in the calm of absence, he realizes that no amount of words can undo the decision already made. Ultimately, people leave quietly because they have learned the hard truth. If they are forced to continually explain themselves, it is not a misunderstanding. It is a pattern of neglect. And when someone recognizes that repeating explanations changes nothing, they stop. They walk away not with anger or vengeance, but with the quiet dignity of someone who understands their own worth. And when he finally feels the permanence of that silence, he is confronted with the reality that the loudest lessons often come in the quietest moments. Regret is a cruel teacher because it comes only after the moment has passed. When he realizes the silence is forever, he will feel it. The heavy, relentless weight of what if. Regret never knocks when it could still prevent the damage. It waits, lurking quietly until the door has closed, until the opportunity to make amends has vanished. And in that silence, he is left with memories, with replayed conversations, with the chance to see every ignored warning, every dismissed feeling, every moment he could have acted differently, but did not. In the stillness of absence, the mind becomes a relentless mirror. He recalls the times he raised his voice instead of listening, the times he assumed loyalty was permanent, the times he thought patience was infinite. Each memory arrives like a small knife, cutting through denial. Regret thrives in these quiet spaces because it has nothing to compete with. There are no distractions, no arguments, no excuses, only the truth staring back. And the truth is unavoidable actions or inactions have consequences, and some consequences are irreversible. What makes regret even more bitter is that it often comes with clarity. Only when the silence settles does he finally see what was clear all along. He sees the subtle signs he ignored, the pauses he mistook for patience, the hurt he thought was insignificant. In hindsight, every warning, every plea, every gentle nudge becomes unmistakable. And yet, by the time he understands, the chance to repair the damage has vanished. The silence that now fills the space is absolute. It cannot be filled with explanations, apologies, or desperate pleas. Regret has arrived, but it arrives empty-handed. Regret also forces introspection. He is left asking difficult questions. Why did I take this for granted? Why did I assume they would always be here? Why did I wait for confrontation when understanding could have been sought? These questions have no immediate answers, only the heavy weight of realization. Silence amplifies regret because it removes the possibility of distraction, leaving him alone with the consequences of choices he cannot undo. The cruelty of regret lies in its timing. It does not prevent mistakes, it only illuminates them after the damage is done. And yet, in its own way, regret is a teacher. It forces awareness, it forces accountability, and it forces him to confront the truth he refused to face when he had the chance. But the lesson is never easy to bear, especially when the silence he now faces is not temporary, it is forever. Growth never comes from justification, it comes from honesty. Brutal, unflinching honesty with oneself. When he realizes the silence is forever, he may first search for reasons outside himself. He may blame the other person, the circumstances, or the timing. He may convince himself that it wasn't his fault, that he tried, that he didn't deserve this outcome. But silence has a way of cutting through excuses. It forces him to look inward and recognize that real growth begins not with blaming the world, but with facing his own shortcomings. Excuses are comforting. They allow him to preserve his ego, to avoid the discomfort of self-reflection. They tell him that the silence is unfair, that he was misunderstood, that he did everything he could. But silence does not answer to excuses. It is indifferent to rationalizations, unmoved by complaints. It only exists as a mirror, reflecting the reality of actions and consequences. Growth starts when he stops hiding behind what ifs and starts asking, what could I have done differently? The moment he takes responsibility, the first seeds of transformation are planted. Understanding that growth requires responsibility is liberating. It shifts the focus from the external to the internal. He begins to see that he cannot control how others respond, but he can control how he reacts. He learns that true strength is measured not by arguments won or explanations repeated, but by lessons learned and behaviors changed. Silence, in this sense, becomes a guide. It teaches him to pause before speaking, to listen before judging, and to act with awareness rather than assumption. The void left by absence is, paradoxically, a space ripe for reflection and personal evolution. As excuses fade, clarity emerges. He starts to recognize patterns in his own behavior. Habits of neglect, moments of impatience, times when pride prevented connection. These realizations are uncomfortable, even painful, but they are necessary. Growth cannot occur without discomfort, and silence in its unwavering stillness ensures that discomfort is confronted. The person left behind is no longer a victim of circumstance, but a student of experience. Every misstep becomes a lesson, every failed conversation a reminder to be better, to listen more deeply, to value the voices that remain. Ultimately, growth begins when excuses end, because only then can he embrace the full truth. He learns that relationships are reciprocal, that understanding is earned, and that the cost of indifference is permanent. In the quiet left by someone's departure, he discovers that transformation is possible, not because someone forgave him or returned, but because he faced himself without distraction, without rationalization, and without the safety net of justification. It is in this space, stripped of excuses, that he finds the strength to become someone who will never take silence for granted again. Silence has a way of speaking louder than words ever could. When he realizes the silence is forever, he will understand that it is not empty. It is filled with lessons, hard truths, and reflections that no conversation could have conveyed. Silence becomes a teacher because it forces attention, reflection, and honesty. It does not negotiate, it does not explain, and it does not repeat itself. It simply exists, holding the weight of all that was ignored, all that was dismissed, and all that was taken for granted. In this stillness, he is confronted with the consequences of his choices in a way that no argument, no lecture, and no plea ever could. The power of silence lies in its permanence. It cannot be bargained with or coerced. It reveals patterns of behavior and exposes weaknesses with clarity that words often obscure. Every ignored feeling, every overlooked warning, every assumption of permanence becomes a mirror reflecting his actions. He cannot escape it. He cannot argue with it. Silence forces him to face the reality that some things once lost cannot be reclaimed. In this way, it teaches accountability, not through punishment, but through reflection. It demands that he examine the person he has been and consider the person he needs to become. Silence also teaches the value of presence. When someone chooses to stop speaking, to leave quietly, or to withdraw emotionally, their absence amplifies the lessons they intended to impart while present. He begins to see what was once obvious but overlooked. Patience is finite, empathy requires attention, and connection must be nurtured continuously. The quiet void left behind is not emptiness, it is instruction. Every heartbeat, every pause, every space where words once flowed becomes a guidepost for understanding what matters, what was lost, and what can be preserved in the future. In its finality, silence teaches humility. It shows him that pride, stubbornness, and assumption carry costs. It reveals the futility of taking others for granted, of assuming that their presence is permanent or that their patience is endless. It strips away excuses, defenses, and justifications, leaving only the raw truth that relationships, respect, and understanding are fragile, and that once broken, their restoration may be impossible. Silence becomes a mentor that cannot be ignored because its lessons are undeniable and its permanence is absolute. Finally, silence teaches resilience. While it is a reminder of what has been lost, it also shapes him for the future. It equips him with the wisdom to value those who remain, to listen deeply, to act with care, and to speak with intention. It teaches that communication is not just about words, but about understanding, respect, and presence. When he finally internalizes these lessons, he recognizes that silence was not the absence of someone, it was the arrival of clarity, a final teacher whose lessons will remain long after the echo of words has faded. And so, when he finally realizes the silence is forever, he comes face to face with the truth he once avoided. He understands that words alone cannot build bridges without respect, that presence cannot be taken for granted, and that every action or inaction carries weight. The silence does not scream, it does not beg, it simply exists, holding the lessons of patience, accountability, and self-worth. In that stillness, he learns to listen, not to the voices around him, but to the quiet voice within himself. It teaches him humility, reflection, and the value of those who truly matter. He discovers that some people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to teach us the art of understanding, the cost of neglect, and the power of respect. And though the silence may sting, it also empowers. It leaves him with a choice to repeat the same mistakes or to carry the lessons forward with wisdom, awareness, and intention. Because silence, when understood, is not the end. It is a guide, a mirror, and a teacher. And in its final unwavering presence, he finds the clarity to become someone who will never take connection for granted again. If you want, I can also polish the entire speech with smooth transitions so that it reads as a single flowing piece of 2,000+ words perfect for a powerful delivery. This would make it feel cinematic and almost like a motivational monologue.